Hey guys, I don't know about you, but over the past few weeks, I have seen probably like a dozen tier list videos for Chaos Zero Nightmare since the limited playtest ended, and I think all of them are wrong. Absolute just jokes. And here we are going to make the ultimate Chaos Zero Nightmare combatant tier list that you guys need to know to do your best reroll and to be ready for when this game launches. Now, I think it's really important to note that in the dev talk video, and as we've seen from some of the combatant animation videos, that a lot of stuff has changed since the limited playtest, and from what I can tell, this is the only tier list video that is going to take those changes into account and predict future changes so that you can be as prepared as possible. Now these tiers are pretty self-explanatory. I'm not going to go over all of them, and we are just going to hop right in. So first off, we've got Amir, and in the limited playtest, she was really not great, but I'm expecting huge buffs for her, especially considering she is the free 4-star that we are getting for pre-registration, so she's going to go right into A tier. Now, Beryl had an ability in the playtest where her cards got stronger the longest, or the longer you could hold them in your hand, and you could get some just absolutely crazy numbers with her. So I'm going to put her also in A tier. Now, Cassius, easily the best card draw in the game. Once you got his E1, again, that might be subject to change, then you could pick a card from anywhere in your deck or discard and pull it into your hand for free. Insane. And even though he didn't have that much offensive power or heal power, that's still really, really good. He's an easy A tier. Hugo had a lot of really, really good, strong follow-up attacks that hit in an AoE, and he could put out insane damage as a sub DPS. And considering his element is relatively rare on launch, I think he's a strong contender for A. Kayron has some absolutely absurd multipliers on his cards, and with epiphanies they get better. You can pair him with some cool synergies like Orlea, and then you can also even spec him a bit as a healer with certain epiphanies. I think he's also an easy contender for A tier. Now, Khalip in the limited playtest was an easy S tier. We already know from her motion video that she's been changed a bit. Her ultimate card, not her ego card, got changed to be a defensive card rather than an offensive card, and that might alter some of her use cases, but I think they're not going to nerf her that hard. People are going to be really, really disappointed if their favorite super powerful character from the playtest turned out to be trash. I think she's going to go down to A tier at minimum. Now, Lucas had some really, really cool bullet synergies with Luke and with Renoa back over here. And I think with those synergies and the fact that he serves a niche that those two don't, in that he can do more AoE damage, I think he could be an easy contender for A tier. Luke was someone who was a little bit gimped in the playtest because a lot of his cards require crit to properly get all of their effects going, and we didn't have memory fragments or the gear system for Chaos Zero Nightmare in the limited playtest, so people couldn't really see him to his full potential, but just sort of extrapolating based on what we know and how good he could already do without that gear, I think he's easily A tier. Magna had some counterattacks, a lot of damage at counterattacks. I actually pulled 2 copies of in the playtest, and so I got to use her very extensively. She also puts up a ton of shielding, and she was really, really fun to play. The devs in their dev talk have said that they might have bosses in the future that either are immune to counterattacks or counterattacks are less effective against in some reason, and so while otherwise I might put her in S, for now I think she's really safe to put into A tier. Maribel, as much as I dislike her design, I can't deny her efficacy. She has some of the best shielding in the game, and she has some offense that is based on how much shield you generate. Now, both generating your shield and using that offense in the same turn can be kind of hard sometimes unless you've got a lot of AP from, say, Mika. So that puts a little bit of a dampener on her abilities, but I think she's still a strong contender for A tier. Mei Lin in the playtest was confusing for a while. The first day or two, everyone's like, oh, she's garbage because her ult doesn't do anything, but people realized that was a translation issue, and her ult did do something. It just did something completely different from what the card was saying. And once people sort of figured her out, they were breaking enemies like crazy no matter what weakness they had, and doing tons and tons of damage, generating a lot of extra AP off of breaks, and she seemed really, really strong. I think she's easy A tier. Mika is something that I might get into a little bit of flack for saying this, but she's the only major AP generator in the game outside of Mei Lin's pseudo AP generation from breaking enemies. Mika directly generates your AP, and she has some really, really good heals too, but healing just wasn't quite as good as shielding in the limited playtest. And although that AP is great, she herself doesn't use that much AP, and so unless your other two combatants want to use a ton of it and you have extra draw power, some of that extra AP might just be going to waste. So I think rather than putting her in S tier, I'm going to keep her in A tier. Nia, on the other hand, focused less on healing and more on just making sure that your other characters did a lot more damage, as much as possible, with morale or through drawing top decks and other stuff. She had some really, really great performance in the playtest. Her healing wasn't as strong, although I think that might be changing with the right number of ego manifestations. So I'm going to put her in A tier. Orlea had a playstyle very, very similar to Beryl over here, with retain cards where she would build up these creature cards in her hand, and they would get stronger as long as she held them. She had an additional mechanic on top of that where if you got duplicates of the creature cards, they would combine into stronger forms, kind of like you're playing a little game of auto chess inside of your Chaos Zero Nightmare, if you will. I thought that was a really, really cool idea, and I think she's a ton of fun, and you could hit some crazy numbers while still getting value out of her and having some unique synergies like with Kayron, because the creatures banish themselves after you play them, so it juices Kayron a lot too. I think that puts her in A tier for me. Owen was pretty underlooked in the playtest because, frankly, he's one of the starter 4-stars. He's a man, and his design is fairly bland, but he puts out some crazy numbers and is really straightforward to use. I think for me that qualifies him as A tier. Ray, on the other hand, a little bit less straightforward, even though she's one of the starting 4-stars. She's a support who focuses on damage amping, but she's a lot more specific in whose damage she's amping. She can amp void characters, she can amp based on the cost of the card, and then she also specifically amps attack cards, which excludes things like extra attacks, like from Amir's Metal Eyes or from Selena's Marks, that kind of stuff. So you have to be very specific in which characters you're using her for, but the strength of those buffs is high enough that I am going to put her in A tier. Renoa was, I think, another character a lot of people slept on in the limited playtest. They found that her combos were a little bit tricky to use, and so they sort of dismissed her as, oh, it's hard to get the number of dirge bullets you need. Once they're in your deck, it's hard to get other cards in your hand that you might want to be using. She's just not as good for how much complexity she adds. And then I saw a bunch of clips of people one-shotting bosses with her, and I looked into some of the card draw synergies that she can have with characters like Veronica or Cassius, and I think it's honestly pretty safe to put her in A tier with just how much potential she has to do damage. Rin is in a very similar game state where she also requires a lot of specificity to use to put out those huge numbers, but she very much can do those big numbers as long as you maintain her stance. We think her stance might be getting reworked, and from what I've seen, those reworks honestly look like they could be a big buff to me, so I feel good putting her in A tier. Selena is an attacking character who also does a bunch of extra attacks by applying mark to the enemy, and she just puts out some absurd damage both through her own cards already and her extra attacks, and she can apply passion weakness to enemies, which makes it so that she can do full tenacity damage, and if you have other passion units, they'll do full tenacity damage as well. She just seems like a really, really great DPS all around, and I think she goes into the A tier. Tressa was the last 4-star free character we got. She's the one you get as the gacha tutorial character, and you deploy her as part of the tutorial. And she focuses on spamming out these shadow daggers that, once you raise her potentials a bit, apply a dot effect that does a lot of damage and goes through a bunch of buffs and debuffs. So she can be really, really clutch, especially against enemies that do things like reduce your damage or put out some kind of like damage reduction buff on themselves. She can just cut right through that. And I think that powerful of a niche, plus the fact that she has general usability and she's free, A tier. Now Veronica, also a bit of a controversial character because her ballistae, which are cards she generates that randomly attack at the end of the turn and you can't use them previously. It can be really, really hard to know how much damage is getting output at the end of the turn and to whom. But that's only if you're relying on her damage. If you are using her as a deck thinner because she has lots of upgrades and she can draw other combatants cards, she can be doing consistent DPS to the enemy team while ensuring that your other combatants get a chance to shine, and I think that's a really, really underappreciated niche, so she is also going into the A tier. And that's all 21 of the launch characters we've got in Chaos Zero Nightmare. As you can see, there's a lot of variety here, and really when you're going for your reroll or trying to figure out if your account is bricked or not, I think if you end up with any of these characters in the A tier or above, you are totally set, you don't need to worry, and you can sort of build whichever characters in those tiers that you prefer. And I hope you found this video super helpful. Leave all of the YouTube pleasantries if you enjoyed it. If you hated it, please comment and yell at me. If you loved it, also comment and yell at me. And thank you so much, and hope you guys have a good rest of your day. This has been Koros, and I'm out.